I am Mudita, and welcome back to Satisfactory. I am currently in Phase 3. I have the majority of the basic items switched over from temporary to permanent factories with storage and dimensional depots all set up. I have more hard drives than I can currently scan, and all the Tier 5 and 6 milestones unlocked. All of this is running on 3,000 megawatts of coal power split between two locations. Today, I want to replace both of them. Normally, I would set up an oil power plant using the diluted packaged fuel alternate recipe. You can make a good amount of power with that recipe, enough to get you to better fuel types. In my last save, I skipped right over Turbofuel, but this time, I want to try something different. I've come up with a setup that I'm pretty proud of that can produce 20,000 megawatts of power in a 20 by 20 foundation area. You can make this even more compact, but I like to be able to navigate it easily. This also gives me the excuse to play with trains, which I'm really looking forward to now that they are less expensive to make and easier to build. Here we are, back at the starting area. So the first thing I would like to do is clean this up a little bit. This whole top floor here is just making modular frames. I can delete all of this, and honestly most things too. I've got the wire and the cable. The only thing over here that I haven't automated would be the copper sheets, so I'm gonna leave that there. Much better. Hopefully by the end of this phase, all of this will be gone. That is what I'm going for. But for now, this is good progress. I like the way the jetpack looks. Thing's neat. We need to do some unlocking. If we go into the sulfur tree of the MAM, this is what I need. Thankfully, I've got plenty of hard drives, so now I just need compacted coal and some packaged fuel. Thankfully, I've already got some packaged fuel. And in this personal storage box, I happen to have a good amount of both coal and sulfur. So one of the really interesting things about compacted coal is when you pull up the recipe and you look at it, it's produced in the assembler. Makes sense, it's two items, right? But if I pull up something like the computer, the default recipe is made in the manufacturer, but you can also make it in the crafting bench. Compacted coal you cannot. The only way to make it is in the assembler, or it's a byproduct of a number of other recipes down the road. But for me, the only way to make it is the assembler. Go ahead and just shove our coal and sulfur in there. And I only need 15, so that'll be done in no time. Would have helped if I actually overclocked it. Would have gone a lot faster. And now that it's done, really doesn't matter. Whoops. Got all my pieces. Let's go ahead and unlock Turbofuel.
Turbofuel unlocked. This upgrade to regular fuel is optimal for fuel-powered generators, jetpacks, and fulfilling long-distance trucker fantasies.
Long-distance trucker fantasies. All right. And let me just make sure. Yep, no rewards currently available. Can't scan any more of these. Well, now I have the Turbofuel unlocked, and every other alternate recipe available to me is either unlocked or it's available in my hard drive library. So as far as the recipes go, I should be all set. Let's go through the plan for this power plant. Here we have the snapshot of the spreadsheet. I'm going to be using one normal node. You could use two impures or half of a pure node if you wanted, but it only needs 270 crude oil, not even a fully overclocked normal node. That'll get turned into heavy oil residue, and then using the diluted packaged fuel alternate recipe, mix in packaged water, and I can turn that into packaged fuel. I will then have to unpackage it because the next step requires fuel and compacted coal in a refinery, and that will create my Turbofuel. To make enough compacted coal, I'll need 480 of both coal and sulfur, which happens to be exactly what my max belt speed is. In total, I'm going to need 720 packaged water per minute, so for that, I will need 2 belts. This will create 600 Turbofuel, which I can then turn into 20,000 megawatts of power. And on the very right, you can see the total amount of machines I need for each of the steps. And a bunch of them are, decent numbers, but most of them don't really work that great together. 9, 12, 32, 19.2, 80 fuel power generators. And here is the beauty of under or overclocking. In my case, I want to use as few machines in this playthrough as possible, and hopefully my computer just runs a little bit smoother at the end game. But with using power shards, some of these processes are going to be more overclocked than others, but I can make it so that they're all really nice, convenient numbers to work with. So using 8 refineries for heavy oil residue and the diluted packaged fuel, and then 16 for turbofuel, you can probably guess you can pair these machines up pretty nicely when you do stuff like this. But before we go over the blueprints, let's talk about the location. I don't have the radar towers unlocked yet, so instead of showing you the in-game map, this is Satisfactory Calculator. Here is where all of the normal crude oil nodes are, which is what I have access to. There are a couple oil wells that I'll be able to use later on, but I can't access those yet. Right now, this is what I can get. I only need a normal node, and I'm already using these 2 impure nodes. Using the next normal node would make a lot of sense. And if I turn on sulfur and coal, the map gets a little bit busier, but now I can get a better picture of all of the pieces that I need. I could definitely use that normal node, and realistically, there's coal, and the sulfur isn't too far. I think one of the best locations is probably the blue crater. Anytime that you're going to do either turbo fuel or rocket fuel, because that's also going to use turbo fuel, I think the blue crater is probably the best spot to do it. The crater is actually a pretty big size, and you can get quite a bit of water out of there. And it has just a ton of everything that you need between oil, sulfur, coal, and then later on if you're doing rocket fuel, it has a good amount of nitrogen gas out there also. And so for that reason, I'm actually going to leave it. If I end up doing rocket fuel down the line, I think that's where I want it to be. And I'm sure there's plenty enough space to do both. But I also don't have any infrastructure going out that way, and it's about as far as I could go on the map from where I'm located right now. It's a fantastic spot, but logistically kind of a pain for me right now, and I'd rather save it for later. So the spot I'm going with is right here, dead center of the map. It's the oil nodes that I probably forget to use in half of my playthroughs. There's 2 normal and 1 pure, so not a ton of oil, but more than what I need right now. There's coal pretty close, there's 1 normal sulfur node pretty close, and then I'll just have to bring in some more. So I feel like this could be a pretty good spot. And eventually, I actually want to move my hub over to this area as well, but that will probably be in the next video. Just to give you an idea where everything is, here is the hub in the starting area, and if we turn over here to the left, there's the Caterium node down there. And then if we go right out here, this is basically where we're going. It's like right on the edge of the Titan Forest. There's oil right there. I promise things will load and look a little bit nicer when I'm up closer. I have dimensional depot set up, but to make traveling back and forth a little bit easier, because I'm sure I'm probably going to have to do that, I'm going to go ahead and set up power towers. And I kind of want to be able to use this power, so I need the power towers anyways. The power towers are now in place, so let's go for a little trip. And just like that, we're out here. This is a really interesting area. You've got lots of beans. They just kind of phase in and out and spawn all over the place here. But there's also a whole bunch of the gas rocks, so they freak out and run away and run into your factories all the time. It's going to be great, don't you worry. And if we look to this side, we've got a good amount of water to work with. As I mentioned in the intro, the factory itself only needs a 20 by 20 area. On one hand, it really wouldn't take up that much of the water if I wanted to build it out on the water, and there's plenty, so even if I decide to build other factories out here, I'll have plenty of space to put those water extractors. But on the other hand, if the factory only takes up a 20 by 20 area, I could probably fit it in the surrounding area somewhere and not take up all that water. Well, a little deforesting may have happened. Normally, I like to try to keep as many of the trees around as I can. But out here in the northern forest, there's a lot of trees, and I'm not going to cut down anywhere near all of them. And you'll notice I said cut down and not blow up, because I did actually cut them all down. Well, look, I still have more to dump in there. I guess I should probably split these between 2 containers. But that's for a future project. Right now, this is roughly where I think I'm going to put the factory. The pipe won't have to be far to get over to the factory, and the water extractors can actually be really close. They can actually be in this area right here. I want to keep trying new things in this playthrough and make myself play just a little bit different, just to keep things fresh. Since I always build on the water, it was time to do things a little bit different. It's still obviously very close to the water, but even working with just a little bit of terrain does add a little bit more challenge to it. Looking down here at the footprint, we go just over here to the corner. There's the normal sulfur node. So that's 300 out of the 480 that I need. And then the 2 closest coal nodes are unfortunately right up in the red forest, but they're right on the edge. Obviously, the normal sulfur is just going to get bussed over, but the other sulfur, I'm going to go ahead and use a train. I know that the factory is only going to take up this 20 by 20 area, and I've got a little bit of wiggle room, and I can move that around. So what I want to make sure that I have enough space for is a train station right here. This isn't a ton of space, so I may need to actually move this factory down a couple foundations. So I want to get the train station in place, and if I'm going to build that, I might as well build the whole thing and get the sulfur running. Because to test the throughput, it's probably going to take a few cycles, and so it's just easier to get that out of the way sooner than later. Not leaving it till last is a good idea. I've now got some foundations and some train stations. So you'll notice they're set up in kind of a funny way. I am using the cool new train stops right here. They're clipped into each other, but they actually look kind of cool. So there's 2 train stations, obviously pointed at each other. So here is my thinking for this factory. And it's only this one factory. I'm going to have a train network that goes all over the place. But there's certain things that I just don't really want to take up traffic or be influenced by other traffic. Mainly these kind of power station type factories. I want them to run flawlessly all the time. And so for the sulfur that I need and all of the coal, I am going to use push-pull trains. And these tracks will just never be connected to the normal world grid. They'll just run on their own and they won't have traffic. But don't worry, I'm not only going to use push-pull trains like I did in my last playthrough. I am going to do a normal train network eventually. But every once in a while you'll have a specific situation where the push-pull just makes a lot of sense, in my opinion. And so the way this is going to work is the sulfur is actually going to come through here, head out there, and we're going to do a train station somewhere right along this rock because there's sulfur up here. The coal train, on the other hand, is going to come out this way, going to head down into this little ravine valley thing and kind of go through the trees and then head its way over to the coal. And we'll figure that out later. We're going to work on sulfur for now. Then we'll work on the factory to make sure that I don't need to expand this anymore. Because I think the coal train, as long as it can get out through here, then I'm kind of free and clear and I can take the train wherever I need to go. I don't need a whole lot of sulfur, so I should only need 1 freight platform. Besides the new building pieces, like the buffer stoppers for the trains, and the elevators, which I love and I'm going to get tons of use out of, I definitely wanted to play around with some of the new features that came out in 1.1. And that's the Blueprint Auto Connect. There are a number of different ways you can take advantage of this. In the past, pretty much all of my train track blueprints have been something pretty simple. Usually it wasn't this thick. It was probably only like a 2 meter is usually what I went with, I think. And then I'd have some walls, so maybe one to go up a little bit higher because I liked giving it that look where it wasn't just the rail as the very top thing. It kind of had a little bit of a barrier. And maybe some lights. You could do some other things. And then you make a curve version and a ramp version. And you add at least a little bit of detail so it doesn't look so plain. but most of my rails have looked like this in the past. And this absolutely still works. It's just I want to try something new. I came up with this. So I know it looks very similar. I'm using a 1 meter foundation instead, but I'm still using the 1 meter walls and some beams to give it some highlights and even some lights. And I've got the pillar built in. So why is this any different from the blueprints that I built in the past? And the reason is this is actually just the main blueprint. So instead of having a flat piece where it doesn't have the pillar built in, I just want to build these. So you see my build mode and it's on default. If I hit R, I've got default auto connect, which is actually the one that I want to use. There's also blueprint mode, which will let it snap to another blueprint. And then there's blueprint auto connect. So if you want it to snap to another blueprint and have the auto connect feature. Now auto connect will work with belts, pipes, and railroads. And as far as I know, those are the only 3 right now. And what I want is the default auto connect. So if I unlock it in place, here's the reason. So if I get this spun around to the right direction, the tricky part is you do need them to be close enough for this kind of feature to recognize each other. So even if they're lined up, that's not going to auto connect. But if I nudge it down enough, even though this is red and it says railroad track is too short, you have to click this twice to actually build it. So clicking it once means that yes, I do want to connect these 2 railroad pieces. Now these 2 are connected and I can use the scroll wheel to change the direction. And now I can kind of take this, well, wherever I want. And so if I kind of come out here, I can see how far I can go. After this, railroad track is too long, so somewhere up here is where I want to put it. Now I can lock it in place and see, well, is this kind of the curve that I want? Well, sort of, but I don't know how much I like this going up so much. So if I just nudge it down, this is just framework for a pillar, so if I clip this into the ground, it really doesn't matter. And so I can kind of play around with either nudging it into the spot that I like, and then I can nudge it up and down to get all of the angles kind of the way that I want. Now, the only thing I can't really adjust is I can't scroll the mouse wheel anymore. So if I want to change the direction of the angle, I'm going to have to unlock it and then change the angle again and then mess with the nudging. Which means I'm probably going to fiddle with these a lot, but that's okay. I think it's just a fantastic feature. It really lets you put in kind of as much time and effort as you want. If you just want to build things really quick, you can make a really simple blueprint, and you could probably build a railroad that spans the entire map in just no time. Or you can kind of fiddle with it, spend more time, and get all of the angles and everything just the way you want it. I think it's fantastic, and I hope it makes building railroads just a lot easier for everybody. The only downside is you end up with a lot of your railroad tracks just kind of exposed on the bottom, which I don't think look bad. I also don't think they look great underneath, which has been the main reason why I don't normally go this route. Normally there's foundations under the whole thing, so you never see the underside of the track. And I've always felt like, well, it just felt more supported that way. I never hated it, but it wasn't my favorite look for railroads. But with this new feature, building like this is really growing on me. And so I've been really enjoying this. This is really fun to build with. So now that I have one placed, I can switch this to Blueprint Auto Connect. And you see that it'll auto connect here. So once I click it once, now these 2 are connected. And now I can take this one, and I'm going to need to make sure that I scroll it the right way. We're going to go along the coast, but I didn't want to take it just in the water. So probably somewhere over here, and maybe we'll lift this one up. So, well, yeah, I don't want it to clip through the ground. And the great thing with this design is if I do decide to lift it up in the air like this, all I need to do is grab the frame foundation, switch it to vertical, and just run those into the ground. And there we go, my train is supported. It's not the most exciting, but it's easy. And I really like the fact that the frames are see-through. I know that sounds weird, but it doesn't take up as much space, I guess. Seems less intrusive on the environment, I guess. I don't know. I like the way that it looks. Well, this is what I have so far. So we come around here, and then we head right around here. We missed that nice big tree, and then we're just sticking right next to the coastline. And that brings me to right here. So now I need to curve around this area. So yeah, from over there, I think I was looking at this spot and thinking, yeah, that's where I'm going. It's not. It's that rock over there. I want this track to cut through here and then follow the little path that's right here. We're going to go up this rock and then we'll cross the river, stream, lake thing over to this side there. But the problem I was running into is if I have this and I can take it somewhere over here, making the curve is going to be easy, but this being flat is probably not the best thing right here. And so for that, I made both a 2 meter and a 1 meter ramp. But this, I don't think it's too crazy, so I think the 2 meter might be a little bit steeper than I need, so I'm just going to use the 1 meter ramp. This one you need to nudge it up so that it'll connect. But then I can unlock the nudge, and now I can place it where I want. So I want it to go, that's as far as it can go, so probably somewhere around here, because it's going to need to flatten out. I don't want it to be too tall or else the track will have to do a weird arcing thing. So somewhere down in here, now obviously we don't want it to clip through the rock. And this is basically how I lay the tracks out. I just get a good view and kind of mess around with the nudging it around, making sure that it's angled in kind of the right angle. And then mess around with, you know, nudging it up or down. I might have to take a look down here and see what it looks like. Maybe nudge it up just a little bit, but yeah, that looks pretty good. And then something like this. And obviously there aren't going to be some trees, but the little ones, I don't care nearly as much about. Down here at the bottom, it says switch to area mode. So I can switch to area, which will clear the entire area, which is what we're all used to. But if I hit R again, I've got single mode. So if I only want to delete this one tree, I can do that. Or else there's a good chance it would have also taken out that tree. And when I'm doing stuff like this, I really like it when the train runs really close to some of the nature, but sometimes it encroaches a little bit too much. So like for that one, I'm gonna have to cut that one down. But if I don't need to clear out the whole area, it's kind of nice not having to. Okay, so the track is going to keep going this way, and we're gonna come up and over here. And then once we get to this point, this is where we'll cross. Because right up here, there it is. There is some sulfur. My plan is just to run a really short bus and then have it drop down. And then I can build a train station just like right down here. And that way I don't have to bring the train all the way up there. A short bus to avoid having to go up or down that much with the train is totally worth it. When doing a project like this, especially with trains, one of the things I like to do is kind of work at both ends and then kind of meet in the middle. So instead of laying the track all the way over here and then building this train station off of wherever I built the train track to, I'm going to build the train station here and then I'll start building the track back. And then that way I can meet the two somewhere kind of in the middle, and it usually works out pretty well. We'll see how it goes. Here comes the Manta. Fly so low through here. So like I said, I'm going to join the two in the middle. But before we do that, let's see what I've made over here. This does look super steep, but thankfully this is all using the double ramp. And for whatever reason, because the ramps are using the normal ramp and the inverted ramp just kind of like merged together, the size of the ramp is double what it would be for a normal ramp. So a double ramp at 4 meters is the same as a normal ramp at 2 meters. See, it goes 1, 2, 4, and then 2, 4, 8. So the train will easily be able to make it up this. Then we get up here to the train station that I need to rename. But it's just going to be a real small train station because all we needed to do is load the sulfur. So when you get out of a train, you can actually get up to the platform real easily. There is a ladder on all these. And we come right over here to the elevator. And because I haven't connected the tracks yet, this isn't quite powered on. But thankfully I have a jetpack. And photo mode. To be honest, I didn't even need to come up here. So we just got the miner with the housing, and then it's just coming straight over here. And then I did this setup just real similar to what I did with the smart plating, where the elevator just runs right next to the lift. And this gives me an easy way to make it up there if I need to go up to the miner for any reason. And it's a nice clean way to run the power. So the sulfur will just come down to here, and then the storage, which just acts for a buffer. whenever a train docks at a train station and it does its unload or loading cycle, it's just over 28 seconds, so I like to just round up, just say it's 30 seconds. All I need is this storage container to hold 30 seconds worth of ore. And then I need this belt to be fast enough to make up for that difference over the course of one round trip. It definitely needs a little bit of decorating, but it's probably not going to be anything too special. Now I just need to connect the two, and thankfully I think I just need one piece in the middle. Now unfortunately I can't get the auto connect to kind of connect to both and then place it in the middle, because then I could see how both of the curves kind of work. Now that I'm thinking about this, because I need to go up that distance, I don't think I'm going to be able to use a flat one. I'm probably going to want to use my 1 meter ramp. So let me fly over here. So I'm going to have it auto connect to this one. So I'm going to click it once and then press H again to unlock it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to this one. And because it'll snap to this blueprint, I can lock it in place, nudge it up. So now it's at the right height. So now what I can do is kind of get this right in the middle. Now it's close enough to the other one. But since it's sloped on both sides, I can kind of have it be more or less in the middle. And now I can kind of play around with this to see where exactly I'm going to like it. And what I'm thinking is I probably want to move this one back a little bit so it doesn't have to do this weird curve. Because it makes sense to me to have this part be more or less straight. And this is where I spend just so much time getting things to look good enough. It's going to be hard to get things perfect, but if I can avoid them doing kind of this weird bend, that's kind of what I would prefer. And here's the final product for my little outpost train station. Well, sort of. You see, this right here is an impure node, and I knew I'd only be able to get 150 out of here. But for some reason, I thought I only needed one impure node. This and one normal node, which will give me 300, is only 450, so I'm still shy 30. So clearly, mistakes were made. That's not even me making a math error and putting something wrong in my spreadsheet. That's just me not thinking. But thankfully, hidden between these two trees, you can kind of barely see a little bit of yellow. Right down there is another impure sulfur node. Now, having the train go all the way down there does not sound like a good idea to me. And I really like this train station, so I think I'm going to make this still just the only train station. Which just means I need to create a bus to go from here all the way down there. And that's going to be a whole lot easier than trying to get a train down there. I just have one last section to do, so let me show you. This is going to be 150 sulfur. So I'm just going to have it run right through here. And we can take it along. Bring it to right here. Grab a merger, and I want it on this spot, but placing it right on the belt gives you that free range of motion. So I'm going to place one here. And now when I hold control, it'll snap to that one. And that's how it'll join up. And now I'm going to have to go through and make sure that I make this last bit all Mark IV, because it's going to have the full 300. Even though I only need 180 out of here, I'm just going to max out both nodes and send all 300. I'm sure I can find a use for that extra 120. For this, unfortunately, you can't go from here all the way down because that stops really early. So what you have to do is once you have the floor hole, you need to place this directly in line with it. So that should be right there. And from here, it won't let me. So I need to use my ladder so I can get closer. And now when I point it at the floor hole, it'll connect. So I should be able to spin this around so that I can see it. And so we'll spin it around. And as long as you have enough materials, because they do get more expensive the longer they are, you can build it as long as you want. And now I can connect this piece to here. And now we have the full thing. So I'll do the same thing with the frame pillars and run that up there. But that's how we're getting over here. This was a really easy to build single belt bus that I made into a blueprint. And so that way I can run the power just right underneath the belt, and it's pretty nice and clean, and I think it looks pretty good. And the easiest way to place them and make sure that everything is still lined up is what I would do is I would zoop out the foundations. I would find how far the belt can go, which was just right around here. And then I took the blueprint You lock it in place, so you get it obviously aligned right there, and then I just nudged it down into the right spot. And then I place it, and then that way you can delete the foundations, and it's right where you want it to be, right at the exact height. And I could grab power from right there, because that's actually my hub, but I'm going to go ahead and run power all the way down. Even though I'm not using switches, I like the idea of keeping this as one contained system. That way, if anything happened in the future, I could disconnect one power line and have the entire power plant separated from the grid. It just gives me a little bit more flexibility, even though I'm not using switches. But let's go back and take a look at the train station. Just got the real small train station here. This system's a push-pull, so it's going to be a locomotive, a freight car, and a locomotive. As far as the decorating goes, I kept it pretty simple. It's a lot of just concrete or asphalt, using some ramps and the corners. And then I use some of the half foundation since you can color the side of it, which just gives you some more options. I like it. So since it's sulfur, a bunch of the accents are yellow. And then to give it the depth, I just placed the windows on the inside and then had it ramp out a little bit farther. And I think it came together pretty well. And I think the train line ended up pretty nice. And then that one just got moved back so that this curve was a little bit more natural and didn't have to bend all weird. Let me finish running the power and then we'll go for a quick train ride so you can see where this is going. We are back at the main train station here. Let's go ahead and jump in, head on out there. Since this is the push-pull and there aren't going to be any more stations, I could just keep the name super simple, so sulfur pickup and drop off. Head on over to pickup. Not too bad. Pretty quick little trip. Go ahead and turn that off. And now all I need to do to get the miners running is go ahead and do this to there. One of the best things about trains is that they carry the power, and so I don't need to drag power towers everywhere. If I'm taking a train there, I've already got power. And here we can see the first bits. So obviously the one right at the top is going to start filling first. It'll take the other one a little bit of a journey to catch up. I'm actually just turning this on early so that I can let this completely fill up and then it'll back everything up, and that's okay. When it comes time to turn this on, which I'm not going to do quite yet, this is how it's going to be set up. It's going to go to the pickup where we are now to the drop off. But on the pickup, I'm going to hit the little cog wheel and I'm going to change this. Instead of the one load or unload has been completed, I'm going to switch this to freight wagon is full. And then if you click on or, it'll switch to and. I can set it for 0 seconds. And we can go ahead and save changes, and then I'm just not going to turn it on quite yet. The freight cars have 32 slots, and since sulfur stacks to 100, I can hold 3,200. If I divide that by the 300 per minute that's headed into this freight platform, by doing it this way, I don't really have to mess with anything. The round trip for this train is going to end up being 10 minutes and 2/3. Do you need to do this? Absolutely not, especially because this is the only train on the track. This sort of a thing is super useful if you have a whole bunch of trains on the same tracks. You can alleviate some of the traffic because instead of this thing running every 3 minutes, it would only be running every 10 minutes. The other benefit really is the power grid. If it's running less, that means the locomotives aren't going as often, which consume random amounts of power. And the freight platforms only consume power when they're being used. So for that 30-second window every round trip, that's when they use power. Other than that, I think they sit at 0 or it's 0.1. By having the trains run less often, you use a little bit less power. Back at the hub, and unfortunately this isn't the last time I'm going to have to run back and do this. Once I have more power, I'll be able to set up more factories, so I don't have to do this manually feeding thing. But I ran out of ammo again. I just needed to craft up some more black powder, throw it into my temporary setup real quick, and then I had plenty to crank out a whole bunch. Now you'll notice I only have one power shard in here, and the reason is, yeah, we're right on the edge right now. I was doing so good on power, and then all of a sudden it just all disappeared so quickly. And if you're wondering why, because I just showed the power grid and it was using 1,000 megawatts less than that assembler, and that assembler definitely isn't using that much power. It's this right here. Originally, I didn't have smart splitters set for the overflow for plastic or rubber. So once the container is filled up, this whole thing came to a stop. And I was totally okay with that. But when I needed more smokeless powder, I needed more heavy oil residue. And the way I'm making heavy oil residue over here is with the plastic and rubber. Once I added the sinks, everything came back to life, and since everything is overclocked, it uses a fair bit of power. But look at all that beautiful smokeless powder. Now I've got some more ammo, and I put a dimensional depot on there, so eventually I'll have plenty. Now it's time for more fun with the trains. Since the trains drop all their cargo off at once, and they have the same issue as the other side, where any belt that's coming directly into or out of a freight platform is going to pause for that 30 seconds. So I need to make sure I use a fast enough belt. Thankfully, a 480 belt for 300 a minute is more than enough. But now on this side, if I use a Mark III, that's only 270 and that's not enough. If I use Mark IV, it's going to shoot out 480. Now obviously, the amount that it's going to continuously get is only 300. But I like my nice steady belt speeds. So here's what I like to do for the unload side. I like to use the industrial storage container. On the loading side, you really don't need a big container. You can get away with a small one 9 times out of 10. Probably even more often. But this is what I like to do here. Now I still only really need a Mark IV belt. The round trip is long enough that the Mark IV belt will be plenty fine. Now to get 300 out of here, I'm going to place a splitter. So we have to use Mark IV. So that would be 480. On this side, I'm going to go ahead and place a merger. I have 480, but I want 300. So I need to subtract 180. 180 is nice and easy. If I take a Mark II, send it back to here, and then a Mark I on this side, that'll send 120 and 60. Here's my 180. So from here, I just need a Mark III. This is the way I normally prefer to do it. The one thing to keep in mind though, storage containers don't work like mergers or splitters. If I have a belt coming out of both of these will stay completely full as long as there are more than 2 stacks in here. Once you get less than 1 stack, it's going to pick one or the other to prioritize. So it can work like a splitter, but you should not rely on them. Same thing with the other side and them not being mergers. As long as there are empty spots in the container, it can take as many items as you can feed into it. Once it's full, however, it's not going to work like a merger. The merger would alternate between inputs. It would take one from here, one from here, one from the far side, and so on. But when these get full, they just pick one or the other. So if you're using both of the inputs, it's best to not let it fill up completely. So I may even need to take out a few stacks because I've let that outpost completely fill up. Now in 1.1, we do have one more option, and that's with the priority merger. I don't have it unlocked quite yet, but I'll go through that in a little bit. I didn't really like how the train was coming in from that angle, and so I decided to just extend the platform a little bit, and that way I could force a really sharp right turn, which honestly, I didn't know you could make a right turn this sharp. I always thought it was 3 foundations, but you can actually do it in 2.5. And here's the reason why it's different now. So if I have just a straight piece, and we'll just say that's the train station, and I want to move this somewhere, right? And normally this is what you would kind of work with, and you would find where it lined up. There we go. There's a 90-degree turn, right? Well, now what I can do, if I scroll my mouse wheel, I can actually just manually change the direction, which you didn't used to be able to do. And this is just so nice, because now I can force the 90-degree angle, and now I can kind of play around with it and find, well, where exactly is that spot. So now instead of a 3x3, you can actually do a 90-degree turn in a 2x2. They just made it so much easier to build. Thank you, Coffee Stain. So now it just makes a sharp right turn, and this way the extra locomotive will at least be inside the train station instead of hanging halfway out. And instead of keeping it up here, I decided to drop it down because I actually have a little bit of space down here. And I'll probably end up using this space to do just a little bit of load balancing. Thankfully, don't need very much. Out of here, I'll have my 300, so most likely I'll probably take that and poke a hole through the wall here. And then I'll lay down more foundations, and then kind of the same thing with the coal over there. And then I'll do my load balancing, because in total I'm going to have 600 of each coming in here, but I only need 480. So I'll split off the 120, and I'm just going to be sinking it for now. I'll save that for a future project. And this way it doesn't take up a whole bunch of space on the floor. The industrial storage containers are just taller than 2 foundation height. Originally I was just going to use the glass frame foundations, but if you do that, it just clips straight through and part of the container sticks up, and so I didn't like the way that looked. So I actually just use roofs, because you can still place railings on roofs, which I don't know if I actually knew that. So now you can kind of walk up and over these, which I kind of like. Both of the coal nodes that I'm grabbing are both normal nodes, so I have the exact same load balancing set up over here. Next, I'm going to put the roof on this thing, and then we can get into the actual factory. I decided to add some catwalks. I figured that was safer than trying to just run across train tracks all the time. That's hazardous. And now I have just the rough outline of the train station. So with this factory, I am leaving so much of the decorating till later. I say that after I decorated the entire train station over there. But that one was way over there, and I just wanted to get it done so I didn't have to go back to it. As you can see over on my to-do list, I've got 3 sets of blueprint. My 4 power gen, my heavy oil residue to diluted fuel, and the turbo fuel. And all 3 of them need the Blueprint Designer Mark II. I was going to place 3 of them next to each other, but I don't have enough computers. And so we'll just go through them one at a time. Here is the first step. You can probably guess which one this one is. The purple one is using the alternate heavy oil residue, so this is going to take 33.75 crude oil. Normally, I don't like dealing with decimal points, but I promise this will work out just fine. It'll produce 45 heavy oil residue and 22.5 polymer resin. This is all just going to be sunk. I may use it in the future, or I might not. But as long as we have a sink to take care of it, the factory will keep running. So the crude oil will get fed into here. The heavy oil residue will then go from this machine right into this one, which is using the diluted packaged fuel alternate recipe. This will take the 45 heavy oil residue, and then I'll need 90 packaged water for each one of these blueprints. And it'll produce 90 packaged fuel. And that packaged fuel is just going to come up here, and then it is going to plug up right there. And then we have another mysterious lift, because on the top, they're just blank holes. Because this is what's going to get placed on top. The floor holes are conveniently placed to be right on either side of the input and output of this packager. This will be unpackaging the fuel. It's going to be taking the 90 that the refinery below is making and turn it into fuel and give me empty canisters. This will just be a closed loop. And so these empty canisters will end up going back to the water extractors, getting repackaged with water, and then being sent to that first step. And so this one is only overclocked to 150%. And then that fuel is being split between the 2 refineries on either side. I'm using the regular turbo fuel recipe. I'll be taking 45 fuel, so that's half of what the packager is outputting, and then 30 compacted coal. And that will produce 37.5 turbo fuel. And like I said, normally I don't like decimal points, but this will work out. Both of these refineries will be overclocked to 200%. And then for the assembler, this is going to be making my compacted coal. I need 60 coal, 60 sulfur to make 60 compacted coal. Each one of these refineries will use up 30. So it just goes into a splitter, gets split in half. So now you can probably see why I messed around with all the numbers to get everything to line up into nice 8, 16, or 32. I was pretty happy with the way these blueprints came together. And then for the output for both of the turbo fuel, that's going to be using this blueprint right here. One of the coolest things you can do with the Mark II blueprinter is be able to fit 4 fuel generators in there. There is a trick to it, so let me show you real quickly in case you didn't know. So when you place them right next to each other, this is pretty much the only way unless you want to feed them on the outside. But I'm making the turbo fuel on the second floor, so I want that to feed down. Good old gravity feed. And so you need them right up next to each other because this right here is the 5 foundations. And the pipeline junction is just barely going to fit in there. So if you do place it first, now you can't connect the two because the pipe is just going to be too short. But you can make it work. What you need to do is connect the two first, and then you're going to place your pipeline junction. But like I said, I'm feeding it from the top, so I would much prefer it to be oriented like this. And so you can do the same thing with the splitters and mergers. If you place one here, it'll now snap to it. However, vertical ones are really weird. If it's horizontal, it's going to snap directly to it. But when I change it vertically, it's off by 1 meter. So all I do is lock it in place, nudge it over 1 meter, and then do the same thing. And now it's directly in the middle. And it's pretty much impossible to see the pipes, but I promise it's all connected and it does work. I've used this numerous times. The clipping on the lights right there isn't my favorite, but this is just too good of a setup to pass up. I just use the big frame pillars to kind of encase the pipe, but that way you can still see it. And then I ran the small frame pillars right along here, and they're in a very particular spot. They're just barely clipping past where the power connection is. So I was able to place a power connection just on the other side. So this right now isn't actually connected. There's no connection to my fuel generator. These won't actually turn on until you have something connected to that power output. By leaving them unplugged, I can let them completely fill up with oil, or fuel, I should say. This internal storage is only 50, but I'd much rather this be completely full. As you can see, each one of these is overclocked to 250%. So if we come over to here, the burn rate is 7.5 per minute. When it's fully overclocked, it'll be 18.75. We multiply that by 2, there's our 37.5. Each one of the Turbofuel refineries are going to feed 2 of the fuel generators. Now let's go ahead and place them. So I'm actually going to start with the generators here at the end, I guess. Let's see. All right, so I've got my one space for a walkway. That's good enough. And then I want to make sure that my roof is in the right orientation. So it drops off actually on one side. So there we go. Okay, so the ramped part is going to face the outside. So this takes up a full 5x5, so we're going to get it to line up right where it should. Why is there a crate? Let's just place this. So the fuel generators are going to go along the outside, so I can just go ahead and do this whole half real quickly. And now I can switch to the heavy oil residue and diluted fuel. And then this one we just need to make sure is facing the right direction. So with this one, I want to spin it around so that the crude oil is facing the middle. And we can go ahead and just place that one. And let's go ahead and just place the other 3. And for the last part, let's take the elevator. Too loud. We've got an elevator to bring me up to the roof level. And now we can use blueprint number 3. If I put it in blueprint mode, it'll at least snap, but it's not anywhere close to being in the right spot. This one, we're definitely going to have to nudge. And for these, I want the outputs facing this way, because that's what we're going to plug these up into. So definitely need to make sure that's lined up. And now I just need to make sure that the floor holes are lined up around the packager. So we've got a little bit of space here, and the same on this side. So that's perfect. And now to bring it all together, we can go ahead and kind of work backwards here. So I'll switch to horizontal and vertical just to make sure. These are taking the turbo fuel and feeding all of the fuel generators. And the packages are dealing with 90 for each one, so that's going to be a Mark II. So I need to make sure that I place one on either side. And then I already have old stubby here for the assembler, because we're going to do all of the load balancing right in the middle. And then as far as down here goes, we already have this all set up, so the package fuel will head up and it's already plugged into this side, And so that is all set up, and those will get fed into the packager. This right here is where the empty canisters are going to go. And so I'll need a Mark II belt out of here. And so I'm going to group up one half of the factory together, and that's going to be 360 empty canisters. And one of the fantastic new additions that they gave us in 1.1, we can now place mergers or splitters or any of their other types directly onto the roofs, just like you could with the pipeline junctions. So now it makes doing this just so much easier because I can just place that right in the middle. I can get Mark II into there. And then we can take this one and plug it into there. So much easier than it used to be. As long as I've been playing, you've been able to place the pipeline junctions on the ceilings as well. So now we've just got tons of options. As far as the crude oil goes, I think I'm actually going to delete all of these. And I'm just going to have one single manifold go straight down the middle and feed both sides. Ta-da! That's what the top floor looks like with all of the blueprints in. And here's what down here looks like. I think it looks way busier than it really is. On this side, like I said, the pipe work, it's just nice and super easy and it just gets run along. And if you change the pipe color ahead of time, it just makes your life a little bit easier. I don't have to come back and repaint everything. The load balancing for the assemblers, super easy. There's only 4 on each side. And so I just want to find the middle point between these two. Not for any particular reason, other than I just like the symmetry. Since each blueprint is 5 foundations wide, that should be exactly how far they are apart. So if I take a splitter and, let's see, so if it's right in the middle of this half foundation, that would be 1, 2, here is right in the middle. I'm going to place 2 splitters. Each assembler needs 60 of each. So for these first belts, I can just use Mark 1. And then we'll do the same thing on this side. And then as long as I go from here to here, it kind of keeps them similar. The belt does look a little bit weird, but I think it's better than going that way. Keeps it a little bit more uniform. So I do that for all 4 of the pairs. And then to bring together 2 pairs on each half, what I'm going to do is, instead of getting it exactly in the middle, because I actually did try that. See, this should be 20 foundations. Yep, okay. So where is 10? Alright, so here, right here is the very middle. And since those are on this half of the foundation split, we just go to this side and we place 2. Each one of these needs 120, so I can just plug a Mark II belt into both of those. And the reason I'm putting these directly in the middle is this way, to join up the 2 halves, I can place this directly in the middle. If I did the same thing and centered this one where it should be, it would be right here. But then when I did that to this half, it would be over here. And then splitting this one in the very middle would just be kind of weird. The total polymer resin is 180, so I'm just going to use Mark III for all of these. And that's just going to group all of it together. And since these are all facing the same direction with the blueprint, I can just group them all up together. Just in one big loop. Almost got there. So I just need to connect all of these, and then at the very end, which should be this far corner, right here will be the last one, and so somewhere right around here, I'll put a sink. And this is at that height, so I'll just be able to do this, 180, and then we can just do that, and that'll get rid of all the polymer resin, and continuously makes that glorious heavy oil residue. The actual factory part of this is by far the quickest and easiest to do. The majority of this project is logistics, and then me spending way too much decorating at the end. And that's why this video is probably a little bit later than it should have been, but I'm proud of the way it turned out. I think it's coming along nicely. And I am up here at the Red Forest. Hopefully he doesn't start attacking me while I'm in camera mode. And so right here is one of the coal nodes, and then the other one is way on the other side, right there. When I was looking at the map, they just looked so close to the crude oil. Why wouldn't I use these? In hindsight, there's a whole bunch of coal down over here somewhere that probably would be easier to get to. But I've already made up my mind that I'm using these two, and that's what I'm gonna do. I have a rough idea on how I want to get out there. So another cool trick with the train track is normally it's kind of free placement, right? But if you hold control, it will force it to go straight. So now even if I look over here, it's going to be completely straight. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring this to the edge. All right, so we'll get it to auto connect. And then what I can do is I can just go straight out. And that way I can get this first section reasonably straight. That's probably how I want to do it. Maybe I'll change it. Well, this is definitely where I end up spending a lot of time just kind of tinkering around with it to get it to look decent. So we're probably going to want it to curve, so probably not go straight. I'm definitely going to have to tinker with this a little bit, but let me just show you roughly the way it's going to go. From here, it's definitely going to switch to a ramp, probably even the steeper ramp. It's probably going to go start turning somewhere around here. Obviously, it's going to be red because that can't make it, right? So we just need to bring it up to where it's not going to be super ridiculous, hopefully. A little bit higher. Something like that. This is definitely going to have to get moved, but you get the rough idea. I'm going to play around with it so that I can make that hopefully look a little bit better. But this is the path the train's going to go, as we're going to go through here. It's going to turn the corner here. We're going to follow these paths just a little bit. Probably going to need to blow up these gas clouds. And then over here, I'm going to have to deal with that guy. Over here, we'll cross the river, and somehow I'm going to get up there. So let me get all those train tracks laid, and then I'll show you the fun new blueprints I've come up with to get me from down here all the way up to there. I have made it out to here so far, right to where I'm going to cross the water. And then, like I said, we're going to go up from here. I think right about here seems like just enough clearance because I will need quite a bit of space. So just to give myself an idea of the spacing, like somewhere right around here probably. Like I said, this is just to make sure I have enough space. I think in total I need 7 foundations. So I want to make sure that I'm going to have clearance on both sides. Yeah, I think that should be good. So if we need 7, this fourth one would be right in the middle. So let's work with that one. I played around in my creative world for a bit with the blueprints, and I came up with a couple of these, and I'm going to share these. This is basically just half of what the full one is. So let me show you what the pillar looks like. Let's actually go ahead and, I forgot how tall it is. So let's go ahead and go up a few. It'll be easier to nudge it down. Because if I nudge it up, then it'll be harder to delete this thing. Alright, so I just have to look at the foundation. So this right here, let me get it a little bit lower. This is where the first one is going to attach to. And if the train is coming up through here, yeah, that looks probably about the right height. And then it'll go to that one, and then it'll go that one, and then it'll go to that one. Let's go ahead and place this one here. And then I can just extend this manually into the ground so it looks right. There we go. So this is just a stack of fix-it foundations. And then I just have the big frame pillars clipped in basically halfway on 2 sides. So a quarter of it is clipped into it. And then just the 2-meter square signs. Right here on the end, I've got 2 small frame pillars. And then these are actually clipped into the frame pillars. So you can actually see it right here on the end. And the reason is these are each 4 meters. So by putting 2 of these, it's basically 1 foundation, which is the distance I wanted. If I added this to the end, then it would have been a little bit too long. It still would work, but I can do it this compact, so I might as well, right? Oh, and then we can delete that. I can grab another one, put it in blueprint mode, and then make sure that we are facing the right way. I need the bottom one to be in line with this one, so that it just keeps rotating the correct way. And if I need to cut some off on the top, I can, or I can add another one. And there's the pillar. And now I have these 2 blueprints. One's for in the future that'll fit a double track. But since this is a push-pull, I only need a single track, so this one's just a little bit smaller. A little bit smaller. It's still kind of big though. You can definitely make these quite a bit smaller. And so I just want to nudge it to where the foundations are lined up right with the center of that right there. And then that one right there. So I made it pretty easy to line everything up. And then I just obviously want to make sure that the ramp is facing in the right direction. That is very important. So I may actually even need to raise this a bit because this is really close to the ground. So I may have to adjust this whole thing by, I don't know, probably having it higher up here would be better. Let's see. Maybe even up one more. Place that and look. I think the train track could get in here a little bit easier. If it's too close to the ground, then it's not going to work as well. Now I just readjust. So that's why I love blueprints so much. Now, thankfully, in blueprint mode, I can just snap into this one. They're rarely quite in the right spot, but that's okay. Vertical nudging solves all the problems. Well, a lot of them anyways. So now we can place the new one here. How far? Like 5 or 6 meters that I nudged it. So we'll just delete these and redo that. All right, now that we have the first one, now we can start placing the rest of these. So just look at this, and then I think the arrow should be to where it's ramping up, which makes it a little bit easier to be able to see from down below. And all right, so it's lined up that way. I just need to go up 1, 2, I think it's 3 meters is how far each one of these off. Nope, 4. So I just need to nudge each one up 4 meters. It's easy enough. All right, I take it back. It depends on where it snaps into the blueprint. So one of them's 4, the other one is probably 12? I didn't actually count. You could definitely say I'm regretting not setting up a temporary thing for quartz and silica. The silica has actually been fine. You can produce so much of that with little rock quartz that I've had a big stockpile. The quartz crystal, on the other hand, I keep using signs. Let me go make a quick quartz crystal run, and I'm going to finish this, and then I'll show you how the tracks get placed. And there's the tower. I guess I didn't really show you what this blueprint entailed, but it's not too complicated. I'm just using 2-meter ramps right here at the bottom, and they're just kind of clipped into these quarter pipes, and then half foundation, and then the inverted quarter pipe, and then a 2-meter. And so that way it kind of keeps that little shape, but I can run the ramp right up the middle. And then just using some ramps and inverted ramps to kind of give it that shape on the outside. Now here's the easy part, laying the tracks. So all you need to do is place it directly in the center of the foundation. And thankfully with the fix-it ones, there are lines right at the edges right there. So that's what that'll line up with. We place the first one here, and then I just fly down to the next one. Go to the halfway mark, place it, grab the next one, and it's just going to keep lining up directly with the halfway mark. And now for the last piece to get me all the way up to the red forest. So the way I did this was I just extended the ramp, and that way I could get the line just right, which I think I'm actually going to need here to get the track to not do a weird bend. Actually, no, I take it back. This isn't where I need that. So we're just going to place that there. It's for the next section that I'm going to need it for. Because up here is where I'm going to level it off and I'm going to go straight. Here is my plan. I'm going to level out some of this because it is in the way. Unfortunately, those are uranium rocks over there, and so I'm just going to have to try to be a little bit careful and not get too close. But I also have plenty of inhalers, so I'm really not too worried. I'm going to place a train station here, and it's going to be a real small one. It's just going to be picking up the coal, and then I'm going to have that same line just continue straight through the train station. It's going to loop back, and then it's going to head to that train station that I'm going to build right next to that coal plant. And then it'll turn around and come back the exact same way. I promise it's not always going to be a floating train station. But I do just really like to test the throughput, make sure everything's working clean and there's no issues. And every once in a while, I either need to move things or I need to add a freight platform or move things around. And it's just so much easier if I don't have to delete entire walls. So it will get some decorating, but that'll be later on. But this is the first one. The buffer storage is just underneath. Like I said, you Really don't need a whole lot for this side of things. The train will stop here. It'll pick up its first freight platform. And then it is going to go along this route over to this one. So here we have the second pickup. And since this is the second stop, it'll be loading into this one, which means I actually don't need this to be a freight platform. I can just change this to an empty one. But same idea, it's just going to load underneath. The node for the miner is in kind of a weird spot, so I put it on a 45-degree angle, which actually works pretty well with the curve mode. This one will also get dressed up later, but this one right here is probably the main reason I haven't done any decorating. I already kind of have a feeling I want to change the way this works. The last resource I needed was this sulfur node right here. This is the normal node, completely overclocked. I'll get 300 out of here. So we've got a Mark IV belt, and I went ahead and already created a little bus for it. So of course, I created a new blueprint. I actually have a way bigger version of this, but I shrank it down to just handle 2 belts at max. So if I'm running 1 or 2 belts, I could use this one. Nothing too crazy, just using some big concrete pillars framed by the rounded concrete beams. And then I just have 1 belt on the bottom, which since I was going to use Mark IV for this one, that's just what I used. If I need to use this again, I'll just load up the blueprint, add another belt if I need it to. And then doing the same thing up top. So big concrete pillars, I just placed 3 of them and then deleted the middle ones. And because these can be daisy chained, you can connect 2 things to them at once. You can have them be connected to each other and then the next one over. So it's kind of a fun way to light up the belts and run power across it. It just went out and then I dropped it down to, I think this is basically the height that it's going into the factory at. It was just easiest if I didn't have to change it at all. And that just runs all the way. Oh, found the max range. And I just have it ending right here. And it's just going to get plugged in right underneath the train station. That's where I'm going to do the load balancing for all these. All right, and for the load balancing, I'm just going to place a bunch of foundations down here. And this is plenty of space. I'm going to have 2 lines of 300 of both coal and sulfur. So out of one of them, I need the full 300. Out of the other one, I need 180. So I'm going to need to split it between 180 and 120, which happens to be 3/5 and 2/5. And so here is my 2:3 ratio splitter. I feel like we've gone over the 5-way split a few times, but I've also got a dedicated video that'll just be like 15 minutes of just the 5-way split, if you're curious about that. Start with the merger. We end up splitting it essentially 6 ways. We looped 1 of them back, so we end up with 5 equal parts. And so here's my sign. 2/5 will come out of this merger, and 3/5 come out of that splitter. Pretty nice and compact. So I just need 2 of these, 1 for the sulfur and 1 for the coal. I'll do the 5-way split on the one coming from the train, and then the excess is just going to go out here. I'm just going to put a sink on the other side of the train station. That'll get dealt with later. And here it is cleaned up. So I ended up changing my mind. I've got the 300 from the train, and that's the main one. And it was easier because that's where I wanted it to plug in on this side. So the 300 coming from the normal node is just coming in here, coming into my 2:3 ratio split. The 2/5 is just getting merged up with the 2/5 from the coal splitter. And those are just going into the sink. And then I've got my full 480 belts headed up to the top. I'm just encasing those with some more big frame pillars. And to test the throughput, I just have those going up to some sinks up here. And then when I'm ready to turn on the factory, I can just delete the sinks and turn them the other way and send them right into the factory, because now they're at the right height. All right, let's make sure this is powered on. Okay, good. I think I just need to power on my train stations and this will get going. And there goes the sulfur train. Set up just like I mentioned before. So with this one, I need 2 freight cars and 2 locomotives. For this one, we're going to test it out this way, but like I said, I think I'm going to go back and I'm going to change some things around. But it's the way it's set up now, so let's see how it works. Now with the sulfur, it waits until it has a completely full load, and then it goes back and drops it off. For the coal, I could probably do that because they're both using the same amount and they each have their own freight car. But for whatever reason, I'm just not overly confident in setting that up. So what I'm going to do is when this comes back, it's still going to drop off its one load, but I'm going to switch it to and I'm going to have it wait for, let's have it wait for 5 minutes and see how that goes. So 300 seconds. Save changes and turn on driving. And the reason I added 5 minutes is kind of for the same reason. It just doesn't need to run constantly back and forth. Each freight platform can hold 3,200. And if I'm putting 300 in each one, it needs to complete its round trip in just over 10 minutes. And I think the round trip is going to be much closer to 5 minutes, so I'm just going to have it wait here by 5 minutes. If that ends up being too long, then the throughput won't be high enough and I'll need to shorten that time. But I think that's going to be good. Already got sulfur, so that's looking good. But to get an accurate picture with throughput on trains, it's going to need to complete a few trips first. So in the meantime, I am going to work on the crude oil and the water extractors. So I did decide to change my mind with the coal. Let's go on a quick trip and you'll see. Instead of stopping at coal pickup 1, we go straight through. The first stop is actually coal pickup 2. And here's the reason I did that. It allowed me to keep both of the train stations down to just the train station and the freight platform. Because coming this direction, it's the very first freight platform. And so now the empty freight car is the first one. Just gotta get out of the radiation. I think the round trip is a bit faster because it didn't have to stop right at the peak of coming up this huge hill to get all the way up here. And now it just cruises all the way back down. I really like this spiral. I definitely like this setup much better. Now they just need to look better than floating platforms. I'll be using that crude oil node right there. And like I've said, I think I can put the water extractors just in this area right here. I'm just going to try to work around this thing. I think the first thing I want to do is figure out the bus. I'm going to have them plug in over here just to give myself enough room to do the old decorating. This was the original belt bus that I came up with, was for this part of the project right here. And I just shrank it for the sulfur. Very similar. It's just twice as wide, using 2 of the big concrete pillars. And that way I could fit 2 belts and then 1 pipe right down the middle. So the way this works is the arrow is facing the same direction as the bottom belts, which are going to be the package water. And then the empty canisters will be going back the same way along the top ones. Because the empty canisters are going to be coming from up here, and the water is going to be plugged in right here. So I just need to figure out kind of where I want to place these. I figure I can just do a 90-degree turn for this last section right here. So if I place it, I should be just like right in line. Looks like it's the right height. Yeah, that looks good. Alright, and then my new favorite mode, auto connect. So with this one, a really cool way to do it is the blueprint auto connect. Because once you get it facing the right way, which the belts will only snap into each other the right way, I click it once, I'll hit H to lock the hologram in place, and then I'm just going to nudge it. And this way I know that it's going to be in an exactly straight line, and it'll be at the right height. And I can just stretch it to however far my belts will go. So there we go. That's as far. And if I don't want them to be, just right in the water, maybe I prefer them to be more on the land, I can just nudge it in a little bit farther. But it gives you a whole lot of flexibility. And now I could just extend these. Or maybe I'll just come up with a little extension piece. That way I don't have to do all the pillars over again. And I can just snap that right there. Pretty quick and easy. And that will auto connect all of my belts and my pipes. And I'm just going to use that to run it out over to here. I'm going to have to blow up some of these. Those are annoying. And then once I get over to this area, I should probably figure out where it's going. Turns out I finally need to unlock the priority merger. Alright, let me show you what that's for. It's for this blueprint right here. I mentioned earlier when I was doing the load balancers for the trains that you could actually do it a separate way. Instead of using the two inputs, instead of making this a merger, I could make this a priority merger. And so here's the way it works. I want both of the left and right inputs to be a higher priority than the center one. And here's the reason why. What I'm doing here is the exact same thing. I'm taking a Mark IV, and then I'm looping back some of it to get to the exact number I'm looking for. Now for this, I actually think I changed it. I actually added one too many belts. That would have made it 300, but what I'm looking for is 360. This right here is going to be my buffer for empty canisters. When this thing is up and running, it'll be receiving 360 empty canisters from the factory. I want it to output 360 to go into these packagers that I'll show you in just a second. And by having the storage container, I can just dump in a whole bunch of the empty canisters and I don't need to worry about getting the amount just right. Mark IV belt going into a splitter, and then I'll be splitting off the Mark II belt, which is 120. Here's the reason why I need the priority merger. To be able to rely on the full 120 a minute, I need this belt to just never stop. Whereas the Mark IV belt that's going to be feeding the 360 heading into this container is always going to have gaps on here because it's 360 on a 480 belt. So if two canisters come in at the same time, this one won't pause, but this one will. But this one has the extra space on the belt, so it really doesn't matter at all. I would say the majority of the time, you don't actually run into an issue here. The only reason I'm doing this is because it's going to make this belt full. Because I'll be bringing in 360 and adding in 120, and so this belt should be full. So every once in a while, one of these two belts would naturally just kind of pause, and I want to make sure it's not this one. Just a real little guy. To get 720 water, I only need 3 water extractors, each of them overclocked to 200%, so they're putting out 240. And so each water extractor is paired up with 2 packagers. Each packager is overclocked to 200%, so they'll intake 120, which would be half, and 120 canisters. So as far as the water section, nice and easy. For the belts, it's a little bit different. My first thought was, since I'm pairing up the packagers to 1 water extractor, I would just do the belts the same way. But then that would mean I would need to do a 2 to 3 load balancer, which is fine. They're not even that big. But at the same time, just why? Because I have a very convenient amount of machines. All I really need to do is just regroup these. Instead of doing the packagers in pairs, I'll just group them in 3s because I have 2 belts. That's way too close, so let's go to there. And this is going to be all Mark II belts. And then into here will be 360, so we'll just have to bring this around. And this right here is where our new blueprint is going to go. Somewhere right around here. Not quite sure how I'm going to fit these in. And we can go to there. Alright, so they'll be a little bit offset. Yeah, why not? And then we can just plug that into there. And that will feed the packagers with my empty canisters. And then on this side, I'm doing the same thing. Just grouping 3 of them together. And then that way I have 2 belts of 360. And then those will plug into the belt bus here. The empty ones will continue all the way around and they'll plug in on this side. So just gonna need to do some rearranging on this end. And I modified my miner housing to fit the oil extractor, which is a very similar but bit of a different shape. It's because of that platform at the very top, I couldn't have it go straight up like the miners for the ore. So I decided to just use glass roof so you can actually see it. And you know what? I think it came out alright. It's a big box with a chunk cut out of it. But that'll be real easy to plug up into the bus right there. And that right there is the factory. And really, all I need is some empty canisters and to power it on. And it would work. But we can't just leave it like this. No, no, no. I'm going to spend way too much time doing some decorating. Just for fun, and to show you just how slow I am at this. The save is currently at roughly 66 hours and 40 minutes. So let's see where it's at when I come back. We're not onto the tour quite yet. Well, of course I got sidetracked and we're working on a quick side project. And for that, I needed quick wire, so I thought it'd be easiest just to run all the way over here so that I could craft up a bunch of high-speed connectors. And why do I need to craft so many? Well, if we take a look at the power, as you can see, I've added some power storage, but they are not charging very quickly because there is not a lot of extra power here. And that's the reason I handcrafted them. If I slooped a manufacturer, I'm going to start eating into my biomass, so I figured I'm just going to craft them up, just get it over with. It really doesn't take too long. Time for the MAM. Go to the Caterium tree, down here at the bottom, the geothermal generators. The things I so rarely use.
Use potentially lethal natural phenomena for your own benefit. It's the fix-it way.
Well, we do love the fix-it way. Geothermal generators used to be much more expensive. They used to require supercomputers, so you really didn't get to use them until they were, I don't know, I think for most of us, kind of irrelevant. Even if you were to put one on every single one in the map, it's really not a ton. It's decent, but it's not a ton of power. The reason I don't use them much is because they fluctuate. They just continuously cycle between 200 and 600, and so on average you will get 1, 2, or 400, but it's going to make my power graph really wavy. And you can see this is where the trains get used, and so we're just right under the 3000. If I add 1 or 2 geothermals, that'll give me just enough buffer to actually charge these a little bit faster than, in 2 days. There's a number of different ways I could have solved this power problem. I could have done another temporary coal setup. I could have gone over to my oil and used the petroleum coke and used those in coal generators. But I think unlocking the geothermals and just temporarily throwing those down is quicker to place, and it'll be quicker to delete and clean up later, because I'm not going to keep them around. I'm pretty much just using them for the startup of this. Back to decorating. The decorations are done, and the save is at 75 hours and 20 minutes. Yeah, I'll let you guys do the math. Well, let's go on a tour. I have collected quite a few beans on my roof. They tend to just spawn right up there. I mean, I guess it's good that there's not quite enough room inside the factory for them to spawn in there, because they would just be stuck. We'll start at the far end and work our way back. So this is the far coal node. Wanted to keep it fairly clean and compact, so just use some half foundations so that I could color in black, because it's coal, and then obviously a lot of asphalt. And here in the front, I'm just using the automated gates, so if you make them too high, they're just tall enough so that they'll both open when the train comes. And because the train is a little bit long, it does stick out when it's docking, and that's why there's this section right here, so that at least it's not floating. So even though it's going to stick out of the station, at least it's supported, I guess, and not just floating. I don't know, it made sense to me. So here's the first one. Nice and simple. And there it goes. And here we have station number 1, which is where another one of my geothermals got placed. So I realized it was just right next to this train station. And this one's a pure. So yeah, these have made a pretty big difference. Each one does 100, so I've got 48 in total in that new factory. And it's charged up a decent amount, and that's going to help. I went with a similar theme on this one, but instead of the old kind of gates, I went with the new roll-up ones. I do really like those. And again, this one's just going to stick out a little bit while it docks, but I didn't really feel like making it bigger. I wanted to keep these real small. I have to say, I'm a pretty big fan of the new curve mode for the belt buses. Inside the factory, I still really like the straight mode just because right angles they work well and they give you probably the most amount of space to work with. But I'm pretty happy with the curve mode. And I'm pretty sure I just left it in the default auto connect because it defaults to the new curve mode. I used the same trick with placing that and the foundations around it. So it's aligned with the world grid, but it's not on the world grid. This is how I got around it. I brought the foundations close, and then I just used these ramps and just clipped them into these foundations. And it gave me a place to run the power, and it's just kind of hidden in these foundations. but I thought it was a little bit cleaner than having the wire go from here all the way to over to there. It just kind of looked funny. I don't mind when they're real short, but I don't know. It just looked weird. And this is pretty much all of my items. You can store even the rest of them in here. This one here is completely full with empty canisters. So I can actually just take those with me now. Eventually, that's what we're going to use, but let's go inside first. Here's the water extractor room. I've already powered them on, but they just stop right here. So the pipes and the packagers are full, but they're waiting on the empty canisters. When it comes time to turn on the factory, I'm just going to come over to here, and I'm going to drop half into this and half into this. And that'll get my water bottle plant up and running. I thought it would be convenient to use a hyper tube to take me from here over to the main part of the factory. And instead of dropping me off the bottom floor, I decided to run it all the way up to the top to the roof. From here, I have access to my elevator and I can get to any of the floors. I made a blueprint out of these, so these ones are just normal ones, and then I placed the blueprint every other one, so there wasn't just a ton of lights, but enough to spice it up. So I've got the sinks and they're just rearranged ever so slightly. I'll be able to delete these belts and connect them to these ones right here. And then I just use more glass roofs to walk on, and then a whole bunch of the glass frame floors. Just ran those straight across the middle. That's where the sulfur and the coal are going to plug into. As far as the roof goes, this was the one kind of weird part. I didn't really want to build the roof so tall that I had to go up above the smokestack, so I wanted them to stick through somehow. But where they ended up was just kind of in a weird spot. If I made this a full circle, it looked kind of funny because it was so off-center. So I decided to not make it a full circle and just have it be a half circle. And it's still off-center, but it doesn't look as weird to me. On the other side, on this same floor, I decided to make a little balcony because it's really nice being able to actually get outside, especially if you're using your jetpack around and stuff like this. Just giving yourself little openings instead of having to use the one front door that I gave myself or something is handy. And to give it some sort of support, I used the new cables. I think it turned out alright. So up here on the roof, I just used a lot of the half foundations, the rounded corners. What I really wanted to do was set this roof in so that I could show off a bunch of the pipes. I do like the clean pipes, but I also kind of like the flow indicators, so I left them as just the normal pipes. But I certainly don't blame you if you prefer the clean ones. I noticed that they were all spaced out pretty evenly, so I wanted to create kind of like a pillar support thing right in the middle of them. So this is a blueprint, just using pillars. The big frame back here I think are unpainted, and then I made these red, and these are the dark black, and then just some square signs that are red. And I got good use of them because I used them on the bottom floor, just on the corners too. On the first floor, I went with just a much smaller little patio because I didn't want to cover up as much of the belts in the pipe. Just like the water extractors, I turned on the oil extractor already. Now what I wasn't anticipating was that I already powered on all the machines, and normally that's really not an issue. The fluids just kind of back up because they don't have the second part. Except for all of these refineries only need crude oil. So I've already created heavy oil residue and it is backed up into here. So I did cheat a little bit with the startup process here. We've already made one step. But this ends up working out really well, and I highly recommend doing it. At a minimum, I definitely recommend letting the crude oil completely fill up. But it's really nice if the machines are already powered on, because depending on how many machines you have, each one has an internal storage of 50 for all the liquids. If they aren't turned on ahead of time and they're empty, as soon as you do flip the switch, they're going to suck up that 50 meters cubed as quick as they can. And so all of a sudden your pipes that were completely full won't be completely full. So I did jump the gun on the startup process a little bit, but I think it's worth it. These ones are also just completely full and all of the resin has already been sunk. And here are my batteries. So of course I made them a blueprint. So I just made it so they could be stackable. However, they're not very easily stackable. So the way I had to place them was I found the spot and then I nudged it until I got to like the roof. And then I placed the second one and nudged it up to the level of the next one. And that's how I had to place them. So they're not quite as stackable as I intended. And that's because instead of using an actual foundation, I'm just using painted beams because these are about as close stacked on top of each other as you can without clipping foundations through them. It helped fill up the gap because there was just 2 foundations worth of just nothing there. So in the very center, I've got those belts, so obviously I'm just going to leave that how it is. But I've got 4 of these little towers, and it helps make it look a little bit more supported in here. So this catwalk will take me all the way around the outside and right down the middle. And here we are at the train station. So this spot got a little bit interesting. They're not as connected as I kind of wanted them to be. So from this one, I can get down and you can get to the sink or whatnot. Through this door, here's all the load balancing for the coal and the sulfur. If we come over here, this first level is kind of like the bottom level of the train. You've got some more stairs over there. And then up here, this one right here is the actual train station floor for the elevator. And you can easily get up and over the train tracks if you want to take a look at this side of the train stations. And then on the other side of these stairs, you can get down to the ground floor of the elevator. And then if you just kind of squeeze through here, I didn't intend this to be like a main entrance or anything like that, but it also felt like I should have some sort of entrance right over here. So there's just some little stairs, and I didn't really want these to stick out much. Let's fill in that gap. All right, that looks better. But that way you can at least get in there from the ground level. And this cable right here is what connects this power plant to everything else in the world. The startup process. My favorite part of every factory. Let's start the stopwatch. Now that the refineries are receiving fuel, let's go ahead and start making compacted coal. Now we can see that the fuel generators are filling up with the turbo fuel. But because they have no connection, it's not going to burn anything yet. So I want these to completely fill up. In fact, I'm going to let both of the machines fill up and the entire pipe. And now the turbo fuel refineries are starting to back up, which means now I can finally start turning this thing on. All I need to do is connect the generator to the wall outlet right in front of it. Gotta love power shards. Plugging up 32 is a whole lot faster than having to do the original 80. Let's take a look. Oh, what a beautiful sight. And we are back to charging. And the way the power system works, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but the batteries don't actually kick in until I exceed my biomass burners, since those are still plugged in. So I probably burned through a little bit of my biomass on starting this up. But the startup time is pretty fast, so I'm totally okay with it. This right here, I don't really like. Let's get rid of that one. But unfortunately, there's still the other one. That gets me a little bit closer to what it should be. Until I delete the coal, it should be at 23,000. I'm going to let this run for a few minutes and make sure that there's no hiccups anywhere and I didn't miss anything, because every once in a while when you kind of let things pre-fill, you've basically built in a buffer, which can hide any problems until, you know, an hour or 2 or 10 down the line, depending on what the issue is. Not like that's ever happened to me before. I'm going to go delete that other geothermal now. So out of curiosity, what are our storage containers at? Okay, so it took about half of the empty canisters. So I could realistically take out the majority of these, because you'll just see this should basically stay at that number right there. I could take out the rest of them and it shouldn't make any difference at all. But I'm just going to leave them in there. I don't see there being a problem with it. One trip is probably slightly farther than the other, so it's using up a couple more. There's just more on the belt in between here and there. But everything in here is working like a charm. And with the other geothermal gone, we've got a nice flat 23,000 megawatts. That makes me happy. So I don't love my consumption is up and down, but with trains, there's not going to be much getting around it, unfortunately, unless I want to put them on a different power grid, which I've done before in the past. But I'd rather keep things simple this playthrough, so I'm just going to live with it. I am going to delete those coal eventually, especially the 600. That one will get deleted real soon. But I have a feeling this episode is running a little bit long already, so we can just highlight the cleanup next time. With this turned on, I'm using just shy of 6,000. Once I get rid of the coal, I'll still have 20,000. This is a step in the right direction. That is going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for being here. I know it's another long one. I'm happy with the way this power plant turned out. An added bonus to using so many packagers is that there are 0 pumps in this entire factory. Being able to add some verticality let me keep the footprint down to a pretty manageable size. You could probably finish the game with this much power if you tried. I'll need some more. But this should last until I unlock better fuel. I can now build at least a couple more factories without having to worry about tripping the grid. I want to clean up the rest of my starting area and convert those temporary setups into permanent factories. Now that I have refineries, I can make copper sheets and quick wire the way I want. I also want to move the hub over to this area. I'll be using the extra sulfur and coal from the power plant to finally automate some ammo. This new factory will also give me a place to process my alien remains, power slugs, and any other one-off thing I can think of. So look forward to all of that, and thanks for watching.